Okay, so now that we know that chromosomes are where genes live, let's talk a little bit about something that you may encounter in your life. Hopefully, not you personally, but maybe someone you know, um, with a certain type of genetic disorders called aneuploidy. Okay, and aneuploidy happens because of an event called non-disjunction. So, a number of genetic diseases are the results of changes in the number of chromosomes or the structures of chromosomes. But chromosomes are really, really big compared to the genes that they contain. Um, Now, large scale chromosomal alterations in reproducing organisms, usually that means that the offspring will not survive. So in humans, this leads to things like miscarriages, um, or what we call spontaneous natural abortions. But plants tend to tolerate these changes better than animals. Animals, if you rearrange their chromosomes, if you rearrange their chromosomes, the offspring usually are non-viable. They don't survive. But plants tend to be better at tolerating these kinds of things. Okay, so what non-disjunction is when gametes are forming during meiosis, but they don't get hooked up to uh, the microtubules properly. So remember, the microtubules in meiosis and in mitosis, they're kind of like the harness system, the system of ropes that pull the chromosomes apart. And it's a pretty good system, but every now and then mistakes get made and things don't get hooked up correctly. And what results is a gamete that receives 2 copies of the same chromosome and another gamete that receives no copy. So let's look at a picture. Okay, so it can happen during meiosis 1. Remember, in meiosis 1, the homologous chromosomes are lining up at the metaphase plate, and then during anaphase, what normally happens is the homologous chromosomes get pulled apart, like this. But in this cell over here, you can see, because of this splash here, that something's gone horribly wrong. And the thing that's gone horribly wrong is that both of the homologous chromosomes are going to migrate to the left. So what you end up with is one daughter cell that has not enough chromosomes and another daughter cell that has too many chromosomes. And then in meiosis 2, the sister chromatids are going to separate, and you're going to end up with 2 daughter cells with too many chromosomes and 2 daughter cells with not enough chromosomes. Non-disjunction can also occur during meiosis 2. So here on the right side, meiosis 1 happened normally, and meiosis 2, the sister chromatids didn't separate properly. So you end up with some number of gametes that have too many or too few chromosomes, and then maybe you have 2 normal chromosome number gametes in this case. So it can happen in meiosis 1 or meiosis 2. Essentially what happens is the harnessing system, the microtubules don't connect properly, and too many chromosomes go one place and not enough go to another. Again, this is typically very, very bad and not viable, but there are a handful of cases in which it works, kinda. So what we call that situation is aneuploidy. So this results when you have gametes that are formed and fertilization occurs. And in one of those gametes, a non-disjunction event has happened. So aneuploidy means not true number of chromosomes. So offspring that have this condition and can survive with it have an abnormal number of a particular chromosome. So to follow up on that, if a zygote or a fertilized egg has one copy of a chromosome and is missing the other copy, we call that a monosomy for one body. A trisomy or a trisomic zygote has 3 copies of a particular chromosome. So here on the left, this is a trisomy, and on the right, this is a monosomy. So again, if this happens, most of the time, you're not going to have a viable offspring forming. And the severity of the defects, the birth defects, depend a lot on what chromosomes are overcopied or undercopied. So some seem to upset the genetic balance more than others. So it's possible that some are actually viable, some cases of aneuploidy, and we call them an individual that has an aneuploid condition. We say that all of the symptoms together constitute what we call a syndrome. So there's a set of symptoms, numerous symptoms together that make up a syndrome. So maybe you kind of can guess where I'm going with this, but for those of you who don't like suspense, the most familiar example of an aneuploid condition, and the most common one, is called trisomy 21 or Down syndrome. And Down syndrome occurs when a zygote has 3 copies of chromosome 21. So this affects about 1 out of every 700 births in the United States. So that's about a fraction of a percentage. And an interesting thing about Down syndrome is that it seems to be the older a mother is at the time when she gives birth, the chances that a baby is going to be born with Down syndrome greatly increase. So typically the magic number is thought to be 40. So at age 40, the numbers, the chances of a baby being born with Down syndrome really start to take off. Not to say that younger mothers can't have Down's babies, or that older mothers can't have normal babies. It's just, statistically speaking, this is a correlation that's been observed. And we don't fully understand why that is, what it is about a mother being older that means she's more likely to have a Down syndrome baby. But Down syndrome patients with Down syndrome have made a lot of advances. And society has made a lot of advances in how we treat people who have Down syndrome. So here you can see this little girl has Down syndrome, and you can tell typically Down syndrome patients have pronounced epicanthal folds, or the eyes have a certain appearance to them where they're sort of more almond shaped, and it looks like the eyelids are more pronounced, and that's called an epicanthal fold. But there are a lot of other issues as part of this syndrome with developmental delay, and there are a suite of other symptoms that are part of this condition. But here you can see in this karyotype, we've got chromosome 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth, and everything's totally fine until we get to chromosome number 21, and we see that there are 3 copies here where there ought to be just 2, one from each parent. And here you can see her karyotype. She's got 2 X chromosomes, so she is female. So this is the most common autosomal or non-sex chromosome related aneuploid condition, and it's the result of non-disjunction. Okay, but the greater number of aneuploid conditions that are viable have to do with sex chromosomes. So here's a question. Maybe you can guess. How do the chromosomes get their names? And they're obviously they are numbered with whole numbers in order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. But how do they get their names? What's the pattern here? Well, hopefully, let's see. Hopefully you recognize that number 1, chromosome number 1, looks much bigger, a little bit bigger than number 2, which looks bigger than number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on and so forth, all the way on down to chromosome number 22, which looks like it's the smallest one. And it turns out that the size is how they get their names. And the size does reflect how many nucleotides of DNA are present in each one, although the correlation is not perfect. Actually, chromosome 22, in terms of the number of nucleotides, is a little bit larger than 21, but they look to be about the same size, so maybe you can be forgiven. In this karyotype, you can see chromosome 21, just 2 copies, so not a Down syndrome patient, and an X chromosome and a Y chromosome, so we're talking about a male in this particular case. So non-disjunction with the sex chromosomes produces a number of different aneuploid conditions. So why just with the sex chromosomes? As it turns out, the sex chromosomes have relatively a small number of genes. So having extra copies of an X chromosome, or not enough copies of an X chromosome, well, you have to have at least one copy. But having extra copies of the Y doesn't really make as much of a profound difference as far as viability is concerned. It can have a huge effect on fertility, certainly. But for all you ladies out there, you know that you don't need a Y chromosome to survive. And for all you men out there, your Y chromosome, of which you only have that one copy, does not have very many genes on it. So every human being has an X chromosome, or needs an X chromosome, but we do not necessarily need a Y to survive as individuals. So the first of these aneuploid conditions is called monosomy X, or Turner syndrome, XO. So this is the only monosome condition that humans can survive with. So the X chromosome is the only chromosome that you can get away with just having one. Patients who have Turner syndrome are usually short, and they may have a webbed neck, and that's what you can see here in this girl, is that there's this kind of extra flap of skin in her neck, which she had surgically corrected. And because they only have one copy of this X chromosome, they don't undergo puberty without hormone therapy. So they need that X chromosome to produce adequate dosage of hormones to go through puberty. And unfortunately for Turner syndrome patients, they are infertile. A trisomy in the sex chromosomes, and the X chromosome, is called XXX syndrome. Patients, again, are female. You can't really tell a whole lot about XXX patients from looking on them. They do tend to have wide-set eyes, although that can be attributed to a number of other things. They tend to be taller than average, and unfortunately they experience a number of developmental issues with things like speech and learning, and they aren't necessarily as coordinated as people who have just the regular complement of X chromosomes. And sometimes they can actually still be fertile with XXX syndrome, but not always. Klinefelter syndrome is a little bit different. In Klinefelter syndrome, patients have the genotype XXY, so they have two X chromosomes and a Y chromosome. So when the patients are born, they are male, and they stay male. I mean, their sex organs don't go away, but often it's not easy to diagnose Klinefelter syndrome until puberty. And at the onset of puberty, which is typically delayed in Klinefelter patients, they tend to not develop in quite the same way. The genitalia don't enlarge as much as in normal males. They tend to have smaller scrota, smaller genitalia. They may develop breasts, a condition called gynecomastia. And this patient here has gynecomastia, or male breast tissue, that again can be surgically altered to appear normal. And Klinefelter patients are also sterile. But no, just a little bit of a difference in like mental faculties, ability to learn, not a lot. Jacob's syndrome is XYY, where a patient can have two Y chromosomes. And there's very little phenotypic effect. So having two Y chromosomes, again, the Y chromosome doesn't have a lot of genes on it, so the effect is fairly mild. In fact, many cases go undiagnosed because there's not a lot of issue with having two X chromosomes. It doesn't affect your ability to do things. So it's been debated whether or not we should even consider this to be a syndrome. It's kind of more just surprise, you have an extra Y. There was a limited amount of evidence to suggest that XYY patients had a greater testosterone level, and they were more likely to be fly into a rage, or things that you associate with people under the influence of androgenic steroids. But that's anecdotal evidence. There's not a lot of support for that. So that is the last of these different aneuploid conditions with the sex chromosomes that I want to tell you about in our chapter on chromosomes. In our next chapter, we're going to talk about the structure of DNA. So that will be chapter 26.